The daily program, The World Today, the program that brings you a closer look at local and international press. I'm your host for today, Nancy Sarah Barakat, filling in for my colleague Rehem Morsi, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mr. Abdul Latif Wahba, a journalist. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Let's start off with the first headline that we have for you. It takes us to Al-Ahram Online, and from it we read, Cairo University grants Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz an honorary PhD. On the sidelines of his visit to Egypt, Cairo University granted Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz an honorary PhD on Monday. The university's board agreed unanimously on the decision. The king had arrived in Egypt Thursday on a 5-day visit, his first to the country since ascending to the throne in January of 2015. Earlier, King Salman said on Sunday that Riyadh and Cairo had agreed to set up a free trade zone in the Sinai Peninsula, adding that both nations will go on with efforts to form a pan-Arab military force to combat terrorism. I'll come back to you, Mr. Abdul Latif, and ask you first of all about the significance of today's event and of honouring, giving the Saudi monarch this honorary PhD.
Yeah, of course, as you know, that Egypt has a good relations with Saudi Arabia and also with the Gulf countries at the same time. And as you know, that Saudi Arabia is the one of the first Gulf countries that supported Egypt politically and economically and on all various fields in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, as you know, that after the repeated visits of the Saudi officials and also of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to Saudi Arabia, they formed the cooperations or coordinations council between the two countries, of course, to enhance all the agreement and to strengthen the bilateral relations on all aspects. And at the same time, as you know, that since 2 months, I think, His Excellency King of Saudi Arabia declared that Saudi Arabia will secure all the Egyptian needs of from oil products along the coming 5 years, and this, of course, valued about 23 billion US dollars with soft terms and so on. And then he declared after that that they are committed to provide or to increase their investment in Egypt by about 30 billion reals. And I think that if we discussed all the 5-day visit to Egypt, they reached to many agreements in different aspects, especially in, for example, promoting the Sinai Peninsula, and at the same time declaring to connect the two countries, of course, with the bridge over the Red Sea. And at the same time, they increased also, or they doubled their investment in Egypt. As you know, that Saudi Arabia has about 6 billion US dollars investment in Egypt through more than 3,000 companies. And I think that Egypt, of course, is trying at the same time to increase their relations with Saudi Arabia, as they have coordinations on all aspects, especially in Yemen, for example, after Egypt participated in the United Arab Forces in Yemen, or the Arab coalitions in Yemen, and also supported the Saudi decisions concerning some territorial issues, especially in Iraq, in Syria, and so on.
Right. To what extent do you see that this 5-day visit has put an end to rumors by some people or by some analysts, critics perhaps as well, who had tried to highlight or to perceived that the Egyptian Saudi relations had been under strain during King Salman's reign?
Yeah, of course, as you know, that some are trying to declare some rumors about a deterioration in the bilateral relations between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, especially in dealing with the Syrian issues. And as you know, that Egypt has a political situations. It may be there was some differences from the Saudi attitude to the Syrian issues, but they agreed, and finally on the peaceful solutions for the Syrian crisis. And as you know that although Saudi Arabia participated in some international coalitions against Daesh, especially in Syria, for example, but they declared they didn't want to enter or to take a rule on the ground on Syria, and this is, of course, the main point is that some political analysts from the opposition to the Egyptian administration is trying to make a widespread for these rumors all over the world. But at the same time, we have to respect the foreign diplomacy for Egypt and Saudi Arabia, even if there is some differences in situations.
Right. Let's go over to the Khalij Times. The headline there reads, Cairo and Riyadh cooperate to achieve common goals. King Salman tells Egypt's parliament. Saudi Arabia's King Salman said on Sunday that Riyadh and Cairo have both agreed to set up a free trade zone in the Sinai Peninsula, adding that both nations will go on with efforts to form a pan-Arab military force to combat terrorism. The Saudi monarch made the remarks during a historic address to the Egyptian parliament, the first time that a Saudi king has addressed the chamber. Parliament Speaker Ali Abdel Al welcomed Salman with a praising address that repeatedly interrupted by enthusiastic ovation. Abdel Al's introduction highlighted strong ties, integration and anti-terrorism cooperation between the two Arab nations. Now, as the article pointed out, Mr. Abdul Latif, this is the first time that a Saudi monarch has addressed Egypt's parliament in its 150-year history. Yeah. How important was this particular event?
Yeah, of course, as you know, that this is a great chance for any foreign international visitors to Egypt if he attended a conventions in the parliament, for example. And as you know, that some countries all over the world, when they appreciated a visit by international or a president and so on, they give him a chance to speak to their Congress, to their parliament, and so on.
Saudi analysts feel that King Salman chose to address Parliament as a way of addressing the Egyptian people because Parliament represents the Egyptians.
Yeah, of course. And as you know that at the same time, Saudi Arabia, for example, has the same assembly, I think so, and also declared some political reforms in Saudi Arabia. So it is a great chance to speak to the representative of all the Egyptian people, to express his views all over the territorial and international situations about how to combat terrorism, for example, in the Middle East, not only in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia, but also in Iraq and Syria, in Yemen, and so on, and also how to activate the Arab forces, especially this is, of course, still a pledge in the Arab League and so on.
Is it obvious? I mean, is the OIC military force going to be one thing and the Arab military force another, or are they just going to be one unit?
I think there would be a cooperation between the Arab forces and also the new coalitions that Saudi Arabia created. There is no differences in goals, especially if we discuss it, we will find all any one of them, the Arab forces or the Islamic coalitions and so on, is concentrating on how to face terrorism, especially all the Islamic countries just now suffered from terrorism, even in Africa, in Central Africa, in North and West of Africa, in Nigeria, in Angola, in Tanzania, and many countries. And at the same time, the Arab area suffered from tourism at the same time. There is a link between all the tourist group all over the world just now. The European countries suffered from the tourism at the same time.
Right. When His Majesty meets with Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Dr. Ahmed Al-Tayyib, and that is as well an important step, because there they discussed ways of not just combating terrorism on a military, which is usually what everyone talks about on a military level, but on a deeper, at the rooted level, where changing the image of Islam, and also, I guess, the speech or the doctrine, something that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has been calling for a long time.
When he decided to visit Al-Azhar as a foundations or the biggest Islamic foundations all over the world, I think some declared that he is trying to implement the will of his predecessors, King Abdullah, and at the same time, as you know, he discussed with Grand Imam how to promote the right Islamic truth and the faith all over the world, not only in the Islamic world or in the Arab world, but also to trying to exploit the Al-Azhar scholarship for the Arab, for the Islamic countries all over the world. And at the same time, as you know, that he presented some donations for Al-Azhar itself, especially Al-Azhar hosted about 40,000 students all over from about 120 countries all over the world, and he committed to participate in the second phase of the hostels of Al-Azhar and so on. I think it is a good attitude to speak in Al-Azhar, to speak for Al-Azhar and for the Islamist world and the countries from Al-Azhar itself.
Right. So let's move on to the daily news, and in other news we have Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry to meet with Cypriot Parliament Speaker UNRWA head. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry receives the Cypriot Parliament Speaker Yanis Umori on Monday, who is visiting Egypt with a delegation at the invitation of his Egyptian counterpart Ali Abdel Al. The meeting tackles regional and international affairs of common interest. The first European parliamentary speaker to visit Egypt since the Egyptian House of Representatives convened in January will sign a memorandum of understanding with his Egyptian counterpart on behalf of both parliaments. Shoukry will also meet with the General Commissioner of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East to discuss cooperation between Egypt and UNRWA, as well as the situation of Palestinian refugees. Mr. Abdul Latif, obviously the importance of this, do you think, of meeting the Cypriot parliamentary speaker, and obviously where do you see relations at this point in time between Egypt and Cyprus?
I do know that now we are still working with the foreign diplomacy on some critical issues, especially as you know that the Italian cases and also some foreign countries, I mean European countries, is still insisting that or trying to practice some pressures upon Egypt concerning the human rights and so on. I think it is a great chance to explain how progress happened in human rights fields in Egypt. Maybe the there was some aggressions in human rights and so on. But now I think after two revolutions, Egypt formed a national council for human rights and also supported the human rights organizations working in Egypt, even the Egyptians or foreign agencies and so on. I think it is important just now to explain the situations of human rights in Egypt. And at the same time, as you know, that the Speaker of the Egyptian Parliament participated in the delegations. This means that Egypt is implementing all the international laws and also local laws concerning the human rights.
Right. Our next headline takes us to the Global Post. From there, the headline reads, UN envoy says next phase in Syria talks crucial. The UN peace envoy to Syria on Monday said in Damascus that an upcoming round of negotiations in Geneva aimed at ending the country's 5-year war would be crucially important. Scheduled to resume on April the 13th, the Geneva talks are aimed at ending a conflict that has killed more than 270,000 people and forced millions to flee their homes since it erupted in March of 2011. Do you expect, Mr. Abdulatif, any progress in the talks?
Maybe, but as you know, let us say first that the Russian airstrikes and the Russian logistic aids and military aids to the Syrian regime put some balance on ground between the government, between the Assad regime, and also from one hand, and on the other hand from the international forces, especially they participated in the last few months against Daesh. I think there is maybe a greater chance for the two sides to resume negotiations again to reach a peaceful solutions for the situations. But as you know that the regime practiced some pressures upon the oppositional fronts, and at the same time the oppositional fronts refused any preconditions for the regime. Right. I think that the United Nations envoy is trying to make firstly a reconciliation between the two groups, especially to resume the negotiation. But as you know that after the progress and the success the Syrian regime
has made
on the ground, I think this will be a political pressures upon the oppositions to accept resuming the negotiations again in Geneva.
The fact of what happens to the future of President Bashar al-Assad is the key problem at the moment.
Yeah, of course, especially all the international communities and also the Western countries and the United Nations is still want to make al-Assad away from the final solutions for Syria. Although that Bashar al-Assad declared that will amend the constitutions and call for a new parliamentary elections and also presidential elections. But I think that the United Nations with some pact from the US and European countries and so on, they refused all these privileges.
Other regional news, Mr. Abdulatif, ladies and gentlemen, takes us to the Washington Times. The headline there, the U.S. deploys B-52 bombers to the Middle East to target Daesh for the first time since 1991. The U.S. Air Force said that it has deployed B-52 bombers to the Middle East nation of Qatar to take part in the U.S.-led bombing campaign against Daesh. It is the first time the Cold War-era heavy bombers will be based in the region since the 1991 Gulf War, when they operated from neighboring Saudi Arabia. The long-range bombers will join a multinational coalition carrying out airstrikes against Daesh targets in Syria and Iraq. Do you see any particular significance to deploying these heavy bombers? I mean, do you think...
I think it is a military show for the U.S., especially as you know that they accused the Russian before that they are trying to export their weapon on the ground in Syria. I think the United States at the same time is trying to promote for their weapons on the ground at the same time by assumption that they are targeting Daesh in Iraq and Syria and so on.
Do you think the United States feels that it has lost ground, if you will, in its war against Daesh in Syria in particular, because Russia has made more progress in a couple of months than the U.S. coalition has done in 5 years?
As you know, if you for example, followed the criticism of the congressman for the Obama administrations, they criticized him. What the success you had in Syria, for example, after 1 year, after a year, and what is the success can be compared with the success that happened by the Russian airstrike in Syria, for example. I think it is a great scenario for the United States to extend the time of competing or forcing or airstrike against Daesh in the area.
Right. Finally, we go to the Gulf today. The headline there, precarious truce starts in Yemen, fighting reported in Taiz. A shaky truce took hold in Yemen today under UN-backed efforts to end a war that has made the country a front in Saudi Arabia's region-wide rivalry with Iran and caused one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The war-damaged capital Sana'a spent a quiet night, but residents said fighting flared in the southwestern city of Taiz soon after the planned start of the cessation of hostilities. Do you expect this truce to hold, Mr. Abdullah?
As you know that the situations in Yemen is going from deteriorations to another deteriorations, especially after the United Nations and all the fictions in Yemen reached to a cross between all the parties. But as you know that Houthis in the north of Yemen violated all the agreement and so on, and they are trying to practice some pressures upon the Yemeni regime and also upon Saudi Arabia, especially they are targeting some public utilities like hospitals, like civil people, civilians and so on. And at the same time, as you know, that Saudi Arabia is trying to make a way for the humanitarian aid, especially for the people in the north of Yemen.
Right. How do you think an end to the violence in Yemen can be reached?
I think that as you know that Houthi rebels asked for a peace brokers, a new peace brokers from the Arab, I think, Gulf countries and so on, and they accepted to negotiations with the Yemeni regime and so on. But I think it is maybe in next days they will declare the resumptions of negotiations between all the factions in Yemen.
Okay, I thank you very much, journalist Mr. Abdullah Wahba. Thank you very much for coming in today. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this edition of The World Today. Thanks very much for watching and goodbye for now. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.